In this lesson, I'm going to show you how to add texture to your 3D design. Let's do it. So let's start adding some texture detail to our design. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add these colors to our color swatch in Cinema 4D. And we can do that by, if we double click on one of the materials, because at the moment these are actually just standard Cinema 4D materials. So we actually need to convert them to Octane materials. So in the color channel, I'm just going to select on the color and then head to the swatch panel here. And I'm just going to drop it in. And let's just call this Domestica. And select OK. I'm just going to do that with the others as well. Literally just select on the material and drop the color into that group. So now that we've got our colors saved into our Cinema 4D color palette, I'm just going to head back to my deck and have a look at the textures that we found on the web. So I'm going to be looking for a wood texture that's, got a bit of grain in it. And I really like this image. The colors are quite bold and, it feels painted and you can see the texture coming through. So this is pretty much kind of what I want to create, but maybe with a little bit more grain. So what we need to do is find a PBR texture. A PBR texture stands for physically based rendering. And it refers to the concept of using realistic shadows and lighting models along with measured surface values to accurately represent real-world materials. So basically, there are lots of PBR textures available on the web for free, and there's lots of paid PBR textures. So a site that I regularly use that you can find free and also paid textures is textures.com. And they've got like hundreds and thousands of different textures. And show you how they will render, which is really useful. So if we select on a texture, you can see what the render outcome is going to be. And then you can see the maps that build the actual texture. We've got a diffuse, height, normal map, roughness, and ambient occlusion. And then there's different sizes for each of the textures. So that's really useful. Makes it really easy to create something fairly realistic, being able to quite quickly when you can download a PBR texture. I actually also use the Grayscale Gorilla Plus library, because if you're a Plus member, you can actually get a material library. And there's lots of options here for any different render engine that you use. I use Octane and a little bit of Redshift. This is really useful because you can just come in and find a particular material that you think works and literally just drag and drop, and that's built the texture for you. It's put all the maps together in the correct way so you don't have to worry about sort of building your materials from scratch. The other site that I use is CCO Textures, and here I found this wood texture which I think is going to work really well for our scene because it's got some really interesting grain and also some really large maps. All you have to do is pretty much just press on the map you want. I'm going to go 8K texture because I think we're going to get quite close on the close-up and we want to be able to see the detail at a high resolution. So I'm going to use an 8K map. So now if we navigate to our downloads folder, we just need to unzip it. Just using Stuffit Expander. And that's going to give us our maps. Create a new folder and label it the same as the zip file. Just in case we need to find like a different size version of the texture. Then I'm going to cut and paste it into my working C4D texture folder. So now I've got it in the path of the project file. I'm going to head to Cinema 4D. So there's different ways of bringing your PBR textures into Cinema 4D. Some of the texture sites that you can download from actually have their own plugins, which will build the PBR textures for you, which is really useful. I use a plugin called TGS Texture Manager, and it's available on the Great Summit site, and it's created by Drop and Render, the farm, which I use to render my Octane projects with. It's a €40 texture manager plugin, and it's super useful. I'll just show you quickly. So if I head to my extensions, TGS Manager. So this is great because you can actually just select on one of the PBR textures and select, if you right click, you can select direct import, and that'll actually build the texture for you. So you don't actually have to worry about bringing all the maps in individually and putting them together in a way that is going to work correctly. I'm actually going to just show you how to build the texture from scratch. So if we go to Create in our Material tab, then Extensions, C4D Octane, and select Octane Material. Then I'm going to double click, and I'm going to change the material type from diffuse to glossy, and from the BRDF model from Octane to GGX, because I'm going to be creating a wood material. If we head to the node editor, I'm going to move this Octane Material tab over here, and I'm going to create some image texture nodes. So now if I duplicate that a few more times, I've got 4 maps, so I need 4 image textures. So the first one is for color. I can select on that tab and write color. I'm going to connect this to the diffuse channel. And then with the color node selected, I'm going to navigate to my Cinema 4D file and select the color image map. So you can see already the effect that that's having on the material. So that's got our color channel in. The next one is roughness. So I'm just going to go to basic and write roughness, and then connect that to the roughness channel. Now if I head to my shader with the roughness node selected, I'm going to go to File and add the roughness image map. The next one is a normal map, and connect that to the normal channel. Now heading to the shader, I'll drop the normal map in. And finally, we've got displacement map. So if I select on the Octane Material tab and head to displacement, I'm going to add a displacement tag. It's going to give us this little box here. We can actually connect our image texture to this texture node here. In the shader, I need to add my displacement map, which is this one here. This is the texture built. We can do a few more things. Let's have a look at how that actually looks at the moment. I might need to change the level of detail with the displacement tag selected here. I'm going to change my level of detail just to 4000 by 4000 for now. Now to see the effect of the wood, I'm going to, before replacing all of these textures with the wood texture, I'm actually going to try and find a balance of the sort of scale and the detail of the wood texture before applying it to all of the different colors. I'm just going to name this wood. I'm going to come over here to my fracture and open that up, and then select on all of my objects. Then with the wood material only selected, I'm going to right click and say apply. And you'll see that that changes, that replaces all of the colors. We've got the wood texture on top of these colors at the moment. So that's why you can't see any of the color information. But you can see some pretty weird things are happening, and I think it's to do with the way that the texture is being mapped onto the objects, as well as like the displacement's really big, really high. We can change a couple of these things. The easiest way of doing that is selecting all of the materials we just put on by pressing Shift and holding Shift and selecting them all. And I'm going to change my projection type from UVW mapping down to cubic. And then I'm going to up the scale to 250. So already you can see that the grain is a lot more consistent in scale, which is great. But we're still, if we come in here, still looks pretty bad. The displacement's way too high. If I double click on the wood, I can go back to my node editor and head to my displacement tag here, and let's reduce this down to 1. Also can see that it's quite the way things are reflecting at the moment. There's little dots here. I think I've got to bring my gamma of my roughness down. Actually going to bring it down from 2.2 down to 1. Another thing is, I feel like the edges are quite rounded, and I think they could be a bit sharper. If I click out of that, select on all of the extrudes here. In the start bevel, I'm actually going to reduce this down to 2, see what happens. I feel like that's a lot better and feels a lot more realistic. So if we were going for photorealism, we could actually add a second material to the individual shapes. It would be a material for the sides of the wood, because, if wood's cut, you would actually see a different type of grain, maybe in a different direction on the sides of the wood. But I'm not going for photorealism. I want to create something that's cool and graphic and just has a bit of interest, which is why I've introduced a texture. And once we add color to the wood, you'll see less of the grain, and it'll be less noticeable that the grain actually kind of just folds over the sides in a sense. So let's add some color to our wood. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to make sure that these color materials are the same mapping and size as the wood ones we've just created. So I'm just going to select on the first color, head down the bottom, pressing Shift and select on the bottom color. Then in projection type, head to cubic and make the length 250 by 250. Now I'm going to delete this wood material because we were just using that as a reference to get the scale and size right. So that's going to bring us back to our color material.